The infrared signature bloomed across Lieutenant Commander Marcus Titan Rodriguez's scope like a deadly flower opening in the darkness. 3 miles out, moving fast, and definitely not broadcasting the friendly identification codes his team had been expecting. The SEAL team leader pressed his radio close to his lips, voice steady despite the ice forming in his gut. Overwatch, this is Ground Element Alpha. We have an unidentified aircraft inbound, bearing 270, altitude approximately 8,000 feet. Confirm friendly air assets in our AO. Static crackled through his earpiece for what felt like an eternity. The mountainous terrain of eastern Afghanistan had a way of eating radio signals, but tonight the silence felt different, heavier. Behind him, 8 of the Navy's finest remained motionless in their overwatch position, each man a statue carved from shadow and steel. They'd been tracking a high-value target through these valleys for 6 days, and now, 12 hours before extraction, something was very wrong. Ground Element Alpha, Overwatch. Negative on friendly air in your vicinity. All coalition aircraft are accounted for and outside your operational area. Advise you take cover and prepare for possible hostile contact. Rodriguez felt his jaw clench. The jet's engine note was growing louder now, a low whistle that seemed to slice through the thin mountain air like a blade through silk. Whatever was coming their way, it was moving with purpose. His sniper, Petty Officer First Class Jake "Deadeye" Morrison, had his Barrett .50 caliber trained on the valley below, but even he couldn't engage an aircraft at altitude. "Sir," whispered Morrison, his voice barely audible through the comm, "that engine signature, it's not Russian, not Chinese either, sounds like." The sentence hung unfinished as the aircraft swept into view, its silhouette briefly visible against the star-drunk sky. It was sleek, angular, moving with the predatory grace of a shark through dark water, but something about its flight pattern was off. Instead of the aggressive banking turns of a ground attack run, it was flying in wide, deliberate circles, as if the pilot was searching for something specific. Rodriguez raised his night vision scope, trying to get a better look at the mystery aircraft. The green-tinted world came into sharp focus, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The jet bore no national markings, no squadron insignia, nothing that would identify it as belonging to any known military force. It was a ghost, and ghosts in this part of the world usually meant one thing: someone very dangerous was looking for them. "All elements, weapons tight until further notice," Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "Whatever this is, we wait and see what it wants." Captain Lydia Phoenix Blackwood felt the familiar weight of her helmet as she banked the modified F-16 through another lazy circle above the Afghan mountains. The aircraft hummed beneath her like a living thing, responding to her touch with the precision that had made her one of the most sought-after pilots in the special operations community. But tonight wasn't about precision flying. Tonight was about something far more dangerous. Her heads-up display painted the terrain below in ghostly green lines, each ridge and valley mapped with satellite precision. Somewhere down there, 8 American warriors were hunkered down, probably wondering who the hell was flying circles above their heads without permission. She almost smiled at the thought. In 12 years of military aviation, she'd grown accustomed to being underestimated, dismissed, and occasionally feared by those who didn't know her story. "Phoenix, this is Raven Base. Confirm your position and status." The voice in her earpiece belonged to Colonel Patricia Hayes, one of the few people in the military who truly understood what Lydia was capable of. It had been Hayes who'd pulled her from a disciplinary review board 3 years ago, Hayes who'd seen potential where others saw only problems. "Raven Base, Phoenix. I'm in position approximately 3 miles northeast of Ground Element Alpha. No visual contact yet, but thermal imaging suggests they've taken good cover. Beginning approach for positive identification." "Roger, Phoenix. Remember, these boys don't know you're coming. Try not to give them heart attacks." Lydia's laugh was dry as desert wind. "Copy that, Raven Base." though I suspect they're already having second thoughts about their career choices. She pushed the throttle forward slightly, feeling the Pratt and Whitney engine respond with a surge of power that pressed her back into her ejection seat. The F-16 had been extensively modified for this mission, stripped of its standard armaments, and fitted with advanced surveillance equipment that could identify a human being from 15,000 feet. But the modifications weren't what made this aircraft special. What made it special was the pilot. Below, she could see the heat signatures of the SEAL team through her thermal imaging system. They were positioned exactly where intelligence had predicted, which meant the mission was proceeding according to plan. What the SEALs didn't know was that they weren't the hunters tonight. They were the bait. For the past 6 months, a shadow organization had been targeting American special operations teams across the Middle East. 3 teams had been compromised. Their positions somehow leaked to hostile forces with devastating results. 27 dead soldiers, all elite operators, all killed in what appeared to be random ambushes. But Lydia knew better. She'd been studying the pattern, analyzing the data, and what she'd found had chilled her to the bone. Someone with access to classified operational information was selling American blood to the highest bidder. The morning sun painted the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of copper and gold, but Rodriguez couldn't appreciate the beauty. His team had been on edge all night, ever since the mystery aircraft had finally disappeared into the darkness around 300 hours. Now, as they prepared to move to their extraction point, every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. "Deadeye, anything on the scope?" Rodriguez whispered into his throat mic as Morrison swept the valley below with his sniper rifle. "Negative, Titan, clear as a bell down there. Maybe our midnight visitor was just passing through." Rodriguez wasn't convinced. In his 15 years as a SEAL, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire operation. The high-value target they'd been tracking had vanished like smoke 3 days ago, leaving behind only cold trails and empty safe houses. It was almost as if someone had warned him they were coming. His radio crackled to life. "Ground Element Alpha, this is Overwatch. We're showing movement approximately 2 clicks southwest of your position. Large formation, estimated 15 to 20 personnel moving in your direction." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. 20 hostiles meant they were outnumbered more than 2 to 1, and in these mountains, numbers mattered more than training. Overwatch confirmed that count, 20 personnel. Affirmative, Ground Element Alpha. And Alpha, they're not moving like locals. This is a coordinated advance. The implications hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. Professional soldiers moving with purpose toward their position could only mean one thing: their mission had been compromised. Someone had sold them out. "All elements prepare for contact," he whispered into his radio. "We've got company coming, and they know exactly where to find us." As if summoned by his words, the sound of rotors began to echo off the valley walls. Not the familiar whop-whop of American helicopters, but the deeper, more sinister sound of Soviet-era aircraft. Rodriguez pressed himself lower into the rocky outcropping, watching as 2 Mi-24 Hinds crested the ridge line to the south. The gunships moved with predatory confidence, their pilots clearly familiar with the terrain. But what made Rodriguez's blood run cold wasn't their presence, it was their flight pattern. They were sweeping the area methodically, professionally, like they had detailed intelligence about exactly where to look. "This is bad," Morrison muttered over the comm. "Real bad." Rodriguez was already reaching for his emergency beacon, the device that would signal for immediate extraction. But as his fingers closed around the compact transmitter, he hesitated. If their position was compromised, if someone was feeding information to the enemy, then calling for help might only bring more danger down on their heads. Above them, unseen and unheard, Lydia Blackwood watched the drama unfold through her surveillance equipment with growing concern. Lydia's thermal imaging system painted a grim picture across her cockpit displays. The SEAL team was well positioned in a rocky outcropping that provided excellent cover from ground assault, but those Mi-24s changed everything. Soviet-era gunships were flying tanks, capable of reducing their position to rubble in minutes. Raven Base, Phoenix, we have a problem. Go ahead, Phoenix. Two Hinds are moving on Ground Element Alpha's position. This isn't random. They're flying search patterns like they know exactly where to look. A pause. When Colonel Hayes spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd feared this moment for months. Phoenix, you are authorized to engage if the ground element is in immediate danger. Repeat, you are weapons-free if American lives are at stake. Lydia's hand moved instinctively to the weapon systems panel, then stopped. Her F-16 was configured for surveillance, not air-to-air combat. She had no missiles, no cannon, nothing that could effectively engage the heavily armored gunships. But that didn't mean she was helpless. Negative on weapons, Raven Base. I'm going in dark. Phoenix, clarify, going in dark. But Lydia was already pushing her aircraft into a steep dive, cutting her engines to minimum power and activating every stealth system the modified F-16 possessed. What she was about to do violated every rule of engagement, every principle of safe flying, and quite possibly several laws of physics. But sometimes the impossible was the only option left. Below, Rodriguez watched the Hinds settle into a hover pattern, their 30 cannons and rocket pods trained on the surrounding terrain. The lead gunship was less than half a mile away now, close enough that he could see the pilot's helmet through the armored glass cockpit. Overwatch, Ground Element Alpha. We need immediate extraction or air support. Our position is about to be compromised. Ground Element Alpha, Overwatch. Nearest friendly air is 30 minutes out. Can you hold your position? Rodriguez looked at the circling gunships and felt his jaw clench. 30 minutes might as well be 30 hours. Negative, Overwatch. We're going to have to displace. But as he prepared to give the order to move, something impossible happened. The lead Mi-24, the one hovering directly over their position, suddenly lurched sideways as if struck by an invisible fist. Its rotor wash kicked up a cloud of dust and debris, and for a moment Rodriguez thought it might crash. Instead, the pilot fought for control, pulling the aircraft into a sharp banking turn that took it away from the SEAL team's position. What the hell was that? Morrison whispered. Rodriguez raised his scope, scanning the sky for any sign of what might have caused the Hind to veer off course. The sky appeared empty, painted in pale morning blue without a cloud in sight. Then he saw it, a brief glint of sunlight off metal, moving impossibly fast across his field of view. Lydia pulled out of her dive less than 100 feet above the Mi-24's rotor disc, her modified F-16 screaming past the gunship at nearly 400 knots. The wake turbulence from her aircraft had been enough to destabilize the heavy helicopter, forcing its pilot to break off his attack run. It was a move that would have gotten her court-martialed in peacetime, but these weren't peaceful times. Phoenix, what the hell are you doing up there? Colonel Hayes's voice crackled through her headset, equal parts amazement and terror. Buying time, Raven Base. The ground element needs an opening to displace. She pulled the F-16 into a climbing turn, watching as both Mi-24s struggled to reacquire their targets. The SEAL team was already moving. She could see their heat signatures spreading out across the mountainside as they executed a textbook tactical withdrawal. But the Hinds were recovering quickly, their pilots professional enough to adapt to the unexpected threat. What happened next would determine whether 8 American warriors made it home alive, or became the latest casualties in a shadow war that most people didn't even know existed. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that this entire situation had been orchestrated by someone who wanted those SEALs dead. The radio crackled to life on an emergency frequency she'd never heard used in combat. Unknown aircraft, this is Ground Element Alpha. Identify yourself. For a moment, Lydia hesitated. Once she answered that radio call, there would be no going back. Her cover would be blown, her mission compromised, and 8 lives would depend entirely on her ability to improvise in a situation that was already spinning out of control. Ground Element Alpha, this is Phoenix. Consider me your guardian angel. Rodriguez felt his world shift slightly as the voice came through his headset. Female, American, and speaking with the kind of calm confidence that only came from years of experience in impossible situations. Guardian Angel. In 15 years of special operations, he'd never heard that call sign. Phoenix Ground Element Alpha. We need immediate assistance. 2 hostile gunships have us pinned down, and we've got ground forces closing on our position. Copy that, Ground Element Alpha. I see your situation. Stay put for another 30 seconds, then move northeast on my mark. Rodriguez wanted to ask who this Phoenix was, how she'd appeared out of nowhere, and what exactly she planned to do about 2 heavily armed Mi-24s with nothing but what appeared to be an unarmed reconnaissance aircraft. But 30 seconds was 30 seconds, and right now he'd take help from anyone willing to offer it. Above them, Lydia was already calculating her next move. The modified F-16 carried one weapon that the enemy wouldn't expect her. The aircraft's electronic warfare suite was military-grade, capable of jamming enemy communications and radar systems across multiple frequencies. If she could blind the Mi-24s for just a few moments, it might give the SEALs the opening they needed. Raven Base, Phoenix. I'm going to light up the electronic spectrum. Advise all friendly forces to switch to backup communication protocols. Phoenix, negative. Your cover will be blown the moment you activate those systems. Copy that, Raven Base. Sometimes you have to choose between the mission and the people. I choose the people. Lydia's fingers moved across her instrument panel, activating jamming systems that had been designed to confuse enemy air defenses, not helicopter gunships. But electromagnetic radiation was electromagnetic radiation, and at close range, even the heavily shielded Soviet aircraft would feel the effects. The first Mi-24 immediately began to bank erratically as its navigation systems struggled to compensate for the electronic interference. The second gunship, following close behind, found itself flying blind as its heads-up display flickered and died. Ground Element Alpha, Phoenix. Move now. Northeast heading 200 meters to the next ridge line. Rodriguez didn't need to be told twice. All elements, displacement northeast, move. The SEAL team flowed across the rocky terrain like water, each man covering his teammate's movement with practiced precision. Behind them, the confused Mi-24s circled like angry wasps, their pilots struggling to reacquire targets through the electronic snow that Phoenix had painted across their sensors. But Lydia knew the jamming wouldn't last long. Military-grade aircraft were built to operate in contested electromagnetic environments, and it was only a matter of time before the Hind pilots figured out how to compensate. The question was whether 8 American warriors could disappear into the mountains before that happened. The rocky outcropping provided temporary cover, but Rodriguez knew they were still in serious danger. The electronic interference that had saved them was already beginning to fade, and he could hear the Mi-24's engines growing louder as their pilots regained control of their aircraft. Phoenix Ground Element Alpha. We're in position, but we need to keep moving. Can you maintain that interference? Negative, Ground Element Alpha. I've given you everything I can without compromising friendly forces. You're going to have to rely on speed and stealth from here. Morrison, crouched behind a boulder with his Barrett rifle, suddenly stiffened. Titan, we've got movement on the valley floor. Ground forces moving fast toward our last position. Rodriguez raised his scope and felt his stomach tighten. 20 men in tactical gear were advancing up the mountainside with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of professional military training. These weren't local insurgents or Taliban fighters. These were soldiers, possibly mercenaries, and they were equipped with modern weapons and communication equipment. Overwatch, Ground Element Alpha. We need extraction immediately. Multiple hostile aircraft and ground forces are converging on our position. Ground Element Alpha, Overwatch. Nearest extraction bird is still 25 minutes out. You need to find a way to hold your position or displace to the alternate extraction point. 25 minutes. Rodriguez looked at his 8-man team, then at the growing number of threats surrounding their position. The alternate extraction point was 6 miles away across open terrain that the enemy helicopters could sweep clean in minutes. Phoenix Ground Element Alpha, what's your fuel status? Can you stay with us? There was a pause before the mysterious pilot responded. Ground Element Alpha, I've got enough fuel for another 40 minutes on station. After that, I'll have to return to base. 40 minutes. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. Rodriguez made a decision that would either save his team or get them all killed. All elements, we're going to make a run for the alternate extraction point. Phoenix, we need you to keep those gunships off our backs. Copy that, Ground Element Alpha. I'll do what I can. What Lydia didn't tell them was that keeping the Mi-24s at bay without weapons would require her to do something that had never been attempted in the history of military aviation. She was going to have to use her F-16 as a guided missile, flying close enough to the enemy aircraft to force them into defensive maneuvers, while staying far enough away to avoid a collision that would kill them all. It was insane, suicidal, and probably impossible, which made it exactly the kind of challenge that had defined her entire military career. The morning sun climbed higher into the Afghan sky as Lydia began her descent toward the valley floor, her modified F-16 screaming through the thin mountain air like a mechanical angel of death. Lydia's aircraft dove toward the lead Mi-24 with the controlled violence of a falcon stooping on prey. At the last possible second, she pulled up and to the right, her wingtip missing the helicopter's rotor disc by less than 10 feet. The Heinz pilot, caught completely off guard by the aggressive maneuver, jerked his aircraft into a defensive spiral that took him well away from the SEAL team's position. Phoenix, that was insane. Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset, a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Insanity is just another word for creative problem-solving, Lydia replied, already lining up for another pass. The second Mi-24 was trying to flank her, its pilot clearly more experienced than his wingman. This one wouldn't be as easy to spook. Below, the SEAL team was making good time across the rocky terrain, but Lydia could see the ground forces closing in from multiple directions. What had started as a simple extraction was rapidly becoming a running battle, and the odds were getting worse by the minute. Raven Base, Phoenix. I need to know how these hostiles found our people. This level of coordination doesn't happen by accident. Phoenix, Raven Base. We're working on that. Your priority is keeping Ground Element Alpha alive until extraction arrives. But Lydia was already putting pieces together in her mind. The precision of the enemy response, the professional equipment, the fact that they'd known exactly where to find a classified SEAL operation, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Someone with access to American intelligence was feeding information to the enemy. The second Mi-24 suddenly broke left, trying to get behind her aircraft where its cannon could find an angle. Lydia rolled inverted and pulled hard, her G-suit squeezing her body as the F-16 turned inside the helicopter's turning radius. The maneuver brought her face-to-face with the Heinz cockpit for a split second, close enough to see the pilot's surprised expression through his helmet visor. Ground Element Alpha, Phoenix. You've got about 3 minutes before these pilots figure out how to coordinate against me. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast. Rodriguez was already thinking the same thing. The alternate extraction site was still 4 miles away, and they were running out of concealment. Worse, his radio operator had just informed him that they were being jammed on several frequencies, a sign that the enemy had brought serious electronic warfare capability to the fight. Morrison, can you engage those ground forces from here? The sniper studied the terrain through his scope. Affirmative, Titan. I can reach out and touch them, but it'll give away our position. Do it, we need to slow them down. Morrison's Barrett rifle spoke once, the massive .50 caliber round echoing off the valley walls like thunder. Through his scope, Rodriguez watched one of the pursuing soldiers drop, his teammates immediately scattering for cover. Above them, Lydia heard the rifle shot and knew the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Once the SEALs started shooting, their position would be pinpointed within minutes. Lydia felt the familiar calm settle over her as the tactical situation crystallized in her mind. She'd been in impossible situations before, though never quite like this one. The key was to think beyond conventional tactics, to find the solution that no one else would consider. The Mi-24s were trying to coordinate their attacks now, one pilot attempting to herd her toward the other's firing solution. It was a sound tactic that would have worked against most aircraft. But Lydia wasn't flying most aircraft, and she definitely wasn't most pilots. Instead of avoiding the trap, she flew directly into it, accelerating toward the gap between the two helicopters at nearly 500 knots. Both pilots, expecting her to break off, found themselves in a deadly game of chicken that they weren't prepared to play. At the last second, both Hinds broke in opposite directions, their pilots more concerned with avoiding a collision than maintaining their attack formation. Ground Element Alpha Phoenix, you just bought yourselves some breathing room. How far to the extraction point? Phoenix Ground Element Alpha, 3 miles and closing. But we've got a problem. Enemy ground forces are moving to cut us off at the LZ. Lydia checked her fuel gauge and felt her jaw tighten. 20 minutes remaining before she'd have to break off and return to base. 20 minutes to keep 8 American warriors alive against overwhelming odds. Copy that, Ground Element Alpha. I'm going to see if I can convince our helicopter friends to find somewhere else to be. What she didn't tell them was that her next maneuver would either scatter the enemy aircraft or result in her own death. She was going to use the one weapon that no military manual had ever catalogued: pure, calculated recklessness. The modified F-16 climbed steeply, gaining altitude until the Mi-24s appeared as tiny specks against the brown and gray landscape below. Then Lydia rolled inverted and dove, her aircraft building speed until the airframe began to vibrate with the approach of its design limits. The Hinds scattered like startled birds as the F-16 screamed past them, its sonic boom echoing off the mountains with the force of artillery fire. For a crucial moment, both helicopter pilots were too busy fighting for control to coordinate any kind of attack. It was the opening Rodriguez had been waiting for. All elements, bound forward, move like your lives depend on it, because they do. The SEAL team flowed across the landscape with the fluid precision of water finding its path downhill. Behind them, the confused enemy forces struggled to reorganize after the unexpected aerial assault. But Lydia knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Soon, very soon, she would run out of fuel, and 8 American heroes would be left to face their enemies alone. Unless she could think of something even more impossible than what she'd already done. Rodriguez felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket as his team approached the extraction point. The landing zone was a flat area of rocky ground surrounded by hills, tactically defensible but also easy to surround. If the enemy got there first, it would become a killing ground. Overwatch Ground Element Alpha. We're 2 clicks out from the LZ. What's the status on our extraction bird? Ground Element Alpha Overwatch. Extraction is inbound, ETA 15 minutes. But Alpha, we're showing significant enemy movement converging on your location. 15 minutes. Rodriguez looked at his men, all of them showing the strain of the running battle, and knew they might not have 15 seconds if the wrong people reached the LZ first. Above them, Lydia was fighting her own battle against physics and fuel consumption. Each aggressive maneuver burned precious JP-8, and her gauges were painting an increasingly grim picture. But she could see something through her surveillance equipment that the SEALs couldn't. The enemy ground forces were moving in a coordinated pincer movement designed to trap the American team at the extraction point. Ground Element Alpha Phoenix. You need to know, the bad guys are setting up a reception committee at your LZ. Multiple firing positions on the high ground, probably heavy weapons. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. Phoenix, can you see an alternate route? Lydia studied the terrain through her targeting systems, her pilot's eye automatically calculating fields of fire, concealment, and approach routes. There was another flat area about a mile to the east, smaller but more defensible. Ground Element Alpha, I'm designating an alternate LZ. Transmitting coordinates now. It's tight, but your extraction bird should be able to get in and out. Copy that, Phoenix. What about those helicopters? Lydia glanced at her fuel gauge again. 10 minutes of flying time remaining, maybe less if she had to maneuver aggressively. The Mi-24s had reformed and were working their way back toward the SEAL team's position, their pilots learning to adapt to her unconventional tactics. Ground Element Alpha, I'm going to try something. When I give you the word, you sprint for that alternate LZ like the devil himself is chasing you. Understood, Phoenix. What are you planning? But Lydia had already switched her radio to the emergency frequency, broadcasting on a channel that every aircraft in the region would be monitoring. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had just made an irrevocable decision. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Phoenix declaring an emergency. Aircraft going down, coordinates follow. Rodriguez heard the transmission and felt his blood run cold. Phoenix, what are you doing? Creating a distraction. Ground Element Alpha. Every rescue asset in theater is about to converge on my position. In the confusion, you might just slip away unnoticed. What she didn't tell them was that her emergency was about to become very real indeed. The mountains of Afghanistan had seen many battles, but none quite like the one that unfolded as Lydia Blackwood prepared to sacrifice everything for 8 people she'd never met. Her modified F-16 screamed toward the valley floor in what appeared to be an uncontrolled dive, its pilot apparently fighting desperately to regain control of a damaged aircraft. It was a performance worthy of Hollywood, complete with erratic flight patterns and radio calls that painted a picture of imminent disaster. But every movement was calculated, every course deviation designed to draw the enemy's attention away from the fleeing SEAL team. The Mi-24s immediately broke off their pursuit of the ground forces, their pilots drawn like moths to the flame of what appeared to be an easy kill. Both helicopters converged on Lydia's position, their gunners preparing to finish off the damaged American aircraft. Ground Element Alpha, go now. Sprint for the alternate LZ. Rodriguez didn't need to be told twice. All elements, bounds forward, move. The SEAL team burst from concealment like a pack of wolves, covering the broken ground toward the new extraction point with the desperate speed of men who knew their lives hung in the balance. Behind them, the valley erupted in chaos as rescue helicopters from 3 different nations responded to Phoenix's Mayday call. But Lydia's deception came with a price. Flying at minimum altitude while simulating an emergency had burned through her remaining fuel reserves faster than anticipated. Her low fuel warning light had been blinking for 3 minutes, and now her engines were beginning to show signs of actual distress. Raven Base, Phoenix. I may have gotten a little too creative with my emergency simulation. Phoenix, Raven Base. What's your actual status? Lydia glanced at her fuel gauge and felt a familiar calm settle over her. She'd been in tight spots before, though none quite this tight. Raven Base, I'm running on fumes and about to find out if this bird can make it to friendly territory on willpower alone. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to fake an emergency, she'd created a real one. Below, Rodriguez could see their extraction helicopter approaching from the east, its crew no doubt confused by the circus of aircraft now filling the valley. The pilot was good, threading his way between the various rescue birds while maintaining a direct approach to the alternate LZ. Overwatch Ground Element Alpha. We have visual on extraction bird. Request immediate pickup. This party is about to get very crowded. 2 minutes later, 8 American warriors were aboard the rescue helicopter, climbing rapidly toward safety. As they gained altitude, Rodriguez caught a glimpse of the chaos they were leaving behind. Multiple aircraft circling the valley, enemy ground forces scattered and confused, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a lone F-16 fighting to reach home on empty tanks. The rescue helicopter banked sharply to the east, carrying its precious cargo toward the safety of friendly airspace. But Rodriguez kept his eyes locked on that distant F-16, watching as its pilot fought to extract herself from a situation that she'd created to save his team. Phoenix Ground Element Alpha, we're clear and en route to base. Thank you for everything. The response came weakly through the static, Lydia's voice strained with the effort of keeping her dying aircraft in the air. Ground Element Alpha Phoenix, just tell them Phoenix was here. Then the radio went silent, and the F-16 disappeared behind a mountain ridge, leaving Rodriguez to wonder if he just witnessed the sacrifice of one of the bravest pilots he'd ever encountered. Miles away, Lydia wrestled with her aircraft as its engines began to flame out one by one. The fuel warning system had progressed from blinking lights to steady tones to the kind of silence that meant her flying career might be measured in minutes rather than hours. But she wasn't done yet, not while there was still air under her wings and a slim chance of reaching friendly territory. The F-16 glided through the thin mountain air like a wounded eagle, its pilot nursing every foot of altitude as the aircraft's systems began shutting down one by one. Lydia had switched to emergency power, her cockpit now lit only by the pale glow of essential instruments and the red gleam of warning lights. Raven Base, Phoenix. I'm about 15 miles out, descending through 12,000 feet with total engine failure. Request immediate assistance. Phoenix, Raven Base. We have multiple rescue assets en route to your position. What's your glide ratio? Lydia checked her airspeed and rate of descent, doing the calculations that would determine whether she lived or died in the next few minutes. Raven Base, at current speed I've got maybe 6 minutes of glide time. I need to find a place to put this bird down. Through her canopy, the Hindu Kush Mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, their peaks sharp as knives against the morning sky. Below, the terrain was a maze of rocky valleys and steep-sided ridges that would turn any landing attempt into a barely controlled crash. But Lydia had been studying these mountains through her surveillance equipment all morning, and her pilot's eye had automatically cataloged every flat spot, every possible emergency landing site. There, about 8 miles ahead, a dry riverbed that might just be wide enough and straight enough for a dead-stick landing. Raven Base, Phoenix. I'm going to attempt a landing in a riverbed, coordinates following. Advise rescue forces that I'll be on the ground in approximately 4 minutes. Phoenix, negative. That terrain is unsurveyed and potentially hostile. Recommend you eject and we'll recover you via helicopter. Lydia looked at her aircraft's instrument panel, at the millions of dollars of classified surveillance equipment that had made this morning's rescue possible. Equipment that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands, no matter what the cost. Negative, Raven Base. I'm bringing this bird home. The decision was pure Lydia Blackwood. Impossible, stubborn, and absolutely right. She'd rather risk her life bringing the aircraft down intact than abandon it to be stripped by scavengers or enemy forces. It was the same attitude that had gotten her in trouble with superior officers for 15 years, and the same attitude that had made her one of the most effective pilots in the special operations community. The F-16 descended through 8,000 feet, then 7, its pilot lining up for an approach that would have been challenging with full power and perfect conditions. With dead engines and mountainous terrain, it was simply insane. But insanity, as Lydia had recently observed, was just another word for creative problem-solving. The dry riverbed rushed up to meet her with the inexorable certainty of gravity, its rocky surface looking less hospitable with each passing second. The touchdown was violent, controlled, and ultimately successful in the way that only a truly gifted pilot could have managed. Lydia felt the F-16's landing gear absorb the initial impact, then watched helplessly as the left main gear collapsed under the stress of landing on uneven ground at nearly twice normal touchdown speed. The aircraft slewed sideways, its wingtip carving a furrow in the rocky riverbed as momentum carried it forward in a grinding, metal-screaming slide that seemed to last forever. When it finally came to rest against a boulder the size of a small building, Lydia found herself hanging upside down in her ejection seat, her helmet cracked and her vision blurred by what was probably a concussion. But she was alive, the aircraft was mostly intact, and the classified equipment was secure. Mission accomplished, even if the landing had been less than textbook. Raven Base, Phoenix, I'm down and mostly in one piece. Aircraft is salved.